too much noise today. I just need the road, the rain, and the hum of the engine.
Have you ever felt like there's a part of you don't really understand? Like, you're not sure who you really are anymore? I've been there too. Let me share something with you. Maybe it'll help you see things a little clearer. Have you ever felt like you're living behind a mask? Not the kind you wear at parties or for fun, but the one that slowly, silently molds itself to your face over time, until you forget what you looked like without it. I've been there too, and if I'm being honest, sometimes I still catch myself hiding behind it. I used to think the ego was this helpful guide, the voice that pushed me forward, that made sure I didn't fall too far behind everyone else. But over the years, I've realized something I wish I had known earlier. That voice isn't always your friend. Sometimes it's the one quietly holding you back. It starts small, a need to be liked, a desire to prove yourself, wanting to feel seen, respected, important. All of that feels normal, right? But then you start shaping your identity around those external things. Your achievements, your image, how people perceive you. And slowly, piece by piece, you lose sight of who you actually are beneath all that noise. I didn't notice it at first. I was chasing things, success, recognition, stability. It felt good on the surface. But underneath, there was this strange emptiness I couldn't explain. I remember sitting in a room full of people, everyone laughing, drinks in hand, music playing, and feeling completely alone. Not because no one liked me, but because I couldn't feel me anymore. I had become a role I was performing, not a person who was living. Carl Jung once said that the ego is a small part of who we are, but when we identify too much with it, it becomes a prison. And that hit me like a punch to the gut, because I was living in that prison. I built it myself, with bricks made from expectations, approval, comparison, and fear. You know what's strange? The ego isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says things like, don't show them that side of you. They won't understand. Or, if you fail, they'll think less of you. It creates this constant pressure to curate your life, to stay in control, to always be enough. But enough for who? When I finally started questioning it, I realized how deeply I'd been disconnected from my own essence. My joy, my curiosity, my sense of wonder, all of it had been sacrificed in service of this carefully built identity. I thought I was protecting myself, but in truth, I was just hiding. I think a lot of us do this, especially in a world that constantly bombards us with images of perfection and polished lives. It's easy to feel like you're falling behind, like you have to keep up or get left behind. But what if that whole game is based on a lie? What if the person we're trying to become isn't even who we want to be? I remember one night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning, looping through every mistake I'd made that week, every opportunity one didn't take, every way I thought I wasn't enough. And then this thought came, clear as day. Who told you that you have to earn your worth? That stopped me cold. We're not born thinking we're not enough. That belief is taught. It's absorbed. And once we internalize it, the ego latches on. It becomes the part of us that's always trying to fix perfect control. But the thing is, we don't need fixing. We need remembering. We need reconnecting. Beneath the layers of performance and pressure, there's a quiet self, the one you were before the world told you who to be. That part of you is still there, still whole, still waiting. And the more I listen to that part of me, the freer I feel. Not always comfortable. Growth never is, but freer. Freer to laugh without wondering how it sounds. Freer to rest without guilt. Freer to be imperfect and still feel lovable. This isn't about rejecting the ego completely. It has a role. It helps us function, navigate, make sense of things. But it's not supposed to run the show. When it does, it isolates us from others and from ourselves. So maybe the journey isn't about defeating the ego, but about seeing it clearly, understanding its fears, not believing every story it tells, and little by little, stepping out of the mask, the role, the performance, and into something more real. I don't have all the answers, but what I've learned is this. When you start to question the prison, cracks begin to form. And through those cracks, the light gets in. Your true self. Not the polished, perfect version, but the soft, tender, beautiful core of who you are. That's where the healing begins. That's where freedom lives. And maybe, just maybe, you're closer to it than you think. There's this moment I keep coming back to. It was a quiet evening, nothing special. I was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. Picture after picture of people smiling, winning awards, buying homes, living their best lives. And for a second, I felt this sharp ache in my chest. Not envy exactly, but something heavier. A question floated up. If I have so much, why do I still feel so empty? I had the things I once thought would make me whole, a decent job, respect from people I admired, a place of my own. From the outside, I looked like someone who had it together. But inside, it was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. That was the moment I realized I'd been measuring my life with the wrong ruler. You see, the ego is clever. It convinces you that the finish line is just one more achievement away. It tells you, once you get the promotion, once they love you back, once you fix that flaw, then you'll feel enough. So you run and run. And when you finally reach that next goal, you look around and find another finish line, always just out of reach. It becomes a loop, a chase that never ends. I've met people who've reached the top of their game. Artists with fame, CEOs with power, influencers with massive followings. And you'd be surprised how many of them quietly admit to feeling the same thing, a gnawing sense that something's missing. That no matter how much they accumulate, it never quite fills the space inside. That's when it hit me. Success doesn't cure the ache. In fact, sometimes it amplifies it. Because once you get what you thought would heal you, and the pain is still there, you're left with no distraction, no excuse. Just the truth. And the truth is this. External success can't touch the parts of us that feel unseen, unloved, or unworthy. I think we're taught to decorate our cages, to make the prison look beautiful, to convince ourselves and others that if the cell is shiny enough, maybe we won't notice the bars. But the soul notices. Always. I started asking myself questions I'd avoided for years. Not what do I want to achieve, but what makes me feel alive. Not what will impress them, but what feels like me. And those questions, they cracked something open. The truth was, I'd abandoned parts of myself to play a role. The creative, curious, open-hearted parts. The ones that didn't fit neatly into the image I'd built. And it wasn't just me. So many of us do this. We silence our real self for the sake of being accepted. But acceptance that requires you to hide who you are isn't really acceptance. It's performance. There's a kind of grief that comes with realizing you've lived more for the approval of others than for your own joy. But there's also a strange, tender freedom in it. Because once you see the lie, you can't unsee it. You begin to sense the weight you've been carrying, and more importantly, that you don't have to carry it anymore. You start to wonder what life might feel like if you stopped trying to earn your worth and just started being. I'm not saying it's easy. Letting go of the image you've crafted is terrifying. There's comfort in predictability, even if it's suffocating. But authenticity, real, raw, messy authenticity, it breathes life back into you. It brings color to a world that had turned grayscale. I've come to believe that the emptiness we feel isn't a flaw in us. It's a sign that we've wandered too far from ourselves. That somewhere along the way, we traded presence for performance, connection for comparison, soul for strategy. And the way back, it starts with the smallest steps, listening to your body when it says, I'm tired, saying no when everything in you screams yes just to please, creating something, anything, not to be liked, but because it's what your heart wants to say. It's in those quiet moments when you pause long enough to ask, what do I really need? That you begin to remember who you are. Not the title, not the resume, not the image, but the self that's been waiting underneath it all, whispering, I'm still here. The ache doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awakening. And maybe, just maybe, the life you've been chasing was never out there. It's been inside you this whole time, waiting for you to come home. You'd think that realizing something isn't working would make it easy to walk away from it. Like once you understand that a job is draining you, or a relationship is holding you back, or a belief is hurting you, you just let it go. But that's not how it works, is it? I've found that even when the cage is open, we hesitate. We stare at the open door like freedom might be a trick. We've spent so long adapting to the prison that we're not sure who we'd be without it. The ego hates uncertainty. It craves control, routine, stability, even if that means clinging to pain, even if it means staying small. I remember this period in my life where everything felt like it was crumbling. The path I was on no longer made sense, but I didn't have a new one to step into. I knew I needed change, but the fear of the unknown was louder than the call for something more. I'd ask myself, what if I leave and it's worse? What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? The ego has 1,000 ways of asking what if, all of them designed to keep you where you are. Sometimes we'd rather stay in a life that's slowly breaking us than risk stepping into one that might heal us, just because it's unfamiliar. That's the twisted power of comfort zones. They don't have to feel good to be familiar. They just have to feel known. And the ego clings to what it knows, no matter how much it hurts. It's like we build our identities around our routines, our roles, our environments. And the idea of changing those things threatens the foundation we've been standing on. Even if that foundation is cracking, even if it's making us miserable, we hesitate, because to step out means admitting we don't have it all figured out. It means surrendering control, and that's terrifying. I've sat in silence with that fear many times. Not fighting it, just feeling it, letting it wash over me. It's not fun. It's not poetic in the moment. It feels like drowning. But if you stay with it, if you let yourself face the full weight of your fear instead of numbing it, something shifts. You start to realize that fear itself can't hurt you. Only the avoidance of it can. And more than that, you begin to see what the fear is protecting. Often, it's not the external situation we're afraid of. It's what we believe it says about us. We fear change because we fear being exposed, as lost, as wrong, as not enough. But what if none of those things are true? What if the unknown isn't a threat, but an invitation? Every major turning point in my life, the ones that actually brought me closer to who I really am, started with that same feeling of fear. It was never comfortable, but it always led somewhere truer. There was a time I stayed in a job that drained me dry, not because I loved it, but because it gave me a title, a sense of importance, a paycheck that validated the persona I had worked so hard to maintain. And when I finally left, I felt lost, stripped. But for the first time in a long time, I also felt light. And in that space, in that terrifying, liberating space of not knowing, I began to rediscover what mattered. What lit me up? What felt like home inside me? Sometimes we don't realize how heavy the mask has become until we take it off. The ego wants certainty. The soul wants truth. And those two don't always walk the same path. The shift starts when you stop asking, will this be safe? And start asking, will this be real? I won't sugarcoat it. This kind of shift is brutal. You might lose people. You might disappoint expectations. Your own, your family's, society's. But you'll gain something far more precious. Alignment. Inner peace. A sense of coming back to yourself after being lost at sea. And here's the thing. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward with it. It's looking at the cage, feeling every tremble in your bones, and saying, I don't know what's on the other side, but I can't keep pretending this is enough. That choice, that first trembling step, is where the real journey begins. The ego will protest. It will beg you to go back, to shrink, to play it safe. But once you've tasted that spark of truth, of possibility, going back stops feeling like an option. So if you're standing at the edge, afraid to leap, I see you. I've been there. And I promise you this. There's life beyond the fear. A richer, messier, more honest life. The kind that doesn't just look good, it feels like home. And maybe that's the life you were meant for all along. There's something sacred about rock bottom. Not in the romanticized, movie script way, but in the raw, no place left to run, face in your hands kind of way. Because when everything you built starts to fall apart, the identity, the image, the life you thought you wanted, something else begins to emerge. Something deeper, something real. That's what happened to me. I had reached this point where the usual tricks didn't work anymore. The affirmations, the distractions, the pushing through. I couldn't keep pretending. I was tired, not just physically, but spiritually tired, worn out from carrying an image of myself that no longer fit. And in that stillness, in that silent exhaustion, a new kind of question arose. What if I don't need to be fixed? What if I just need to be seen? That changed everything. Carl Jung talked about individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of ourselves, especially the ones we've exiled. The shadow, the wounds, the shame, the things we were told not to show, the parts we learned to reject to survive. I started to look at those parts, not analyze them, not judge them, just notice. The fear of being left, the need to be perfect, the ache of never feeling good enough. I stopped asking what's wrong with me and began to ask, where did this start? And what I found surprised me. Most of the things I thought were flaws were actually defenses. Clever, complex ways I had learned to protect myself from pain. The overachiever in me wasn't greedy. He was scared. The people pleaser wasn't spineless. She was just desperate to feel loved. The anger, the sadness, the numbness, they all had stories. And slowly, I began to listen. This is where the real healing begins. Not in erasing who we've been, but in embracing all the pieces with tenderness. Seeing the shadow not as something to exile, but as something to understand. Because those parts of us, even the ones we don't like, are trying to help us. They just learned the wrong language. I remember writing myself a letter one night. I didn't plan to, it just kind of poured out. And I wrote not from the part of me that wanted change, but from the part that finally understood. I told myself, you did the best you could with what you knew, and now you know more. So now we do better. It was one of the most compassionate things I'd ever done. And for once, it didn't feel like I was trying to fix myself. It felt like I was finally meeting myself. That's what rewriting your story looks like. It's not denial. It's not rewriting facts. It's choosing a different lens, one that honors your survival, your complexity, your humanity. I stopped defining myself by my mistakes. I started seeing them as teachers. I stopped trying to be the best and started asking, what feels honest? What feels like peace? Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that settles in your bones. And something beautiful happened. I stopped needing to be impressive. I just wanted to be whole. The irony? That wholeness is magnetic. When you stop performing, you start connecting. People feel it. They lean in. Because deep down, we're all longing for permission to be real, to be messy, to be human. And when you go first, when you show up without the armor, you give others the courage to do the same. I think about this often. How many of us are walking around, terrified of being seen, while desperately hoping someone will really see us? What a heartbreaking paradox. But also what an opportunity. Because we can change that. We can choose to see ourselves first. The past doesn't get erased in this process. It just loses its grip. It goes from being a sentence to a chapter. And suddenly, you're holding the pen again. You're not who you were at your lowest. You're who you became because of it. That's the shift. From shame to story. From victim to author. From hiding to honoring. And no, it's not clean or linear. Some days, I still fall back into old patterns. The ego whispers again. The fear resurfaces. But now I catch it. I breathe. I remember this is part of the process. You don't wake up one day and become whole. You remember your wholeness piece by piece. You reclaim it. So if you're in that space right now, if the ground beneath you is shaky and the old ways no longer make sense, know this, you're not broken. You're on the brink. And the version of you that's waiting on the other side, they're not better. They're just truer. And that changes everything. If someone had told me that the way out wasn't some grand, heroic act, but a series of tiny, quiet choices, I'm not sure I would have believed them. I thought transformation had to be loud, dramatic even. But what I've come to learn is that the real shifts happen in the subtle, private moments no one else sees. Like sitting with a racing thought instead of trying to silence it. Like catching myself in self-criticism and gently saying, no, not this time. Like pausing before reacting, breathing instead of spiraling. These moments, though small, are revolutionary because they chip away at the old wiring, the reflexes shaped by ego, fear, and performance, and make space for something softer to grow. Meditation was the first practice that taught me this. And to be honest, I resisted it for years. The idea of just sitting there doing nothing while my mind ran wild. No thanks. But eventually I got tired of running from my thoughts, my emotions, myself. So I sat. 5 minutes, then 10, then longer. At first it was chaos. My mind felt like a crowded room with everyone shouting at once. But slowly, I started to notice the space between the thoughts. And in that space, I met a part of myself I had long forgotten, calm, present, unshaken. It wasn't that my thoughts disappeared. It was that I stopped believing all of them, especially the harsh ones. That inner voice, the one that tells you you're not doing enough, not being enough, it's not truth. It's habit. It's ego playing a role it was never meant to have. And that's where the next practice came in, inner dialogue. I started paying attention to how I spoke to myself. The tone, the language, the assumptions. And I realized that if I spoke to a friend the way I often spoke to myself, that friend wouldn't stay in my life for very long. So I began rewriting the script. Instead of "you're so behind," I said, "you're doing your best, and that's enough for today." Instead of "you always mess this up," I asked, "what can you learn from this?" It wasn't about toxic positivity or pretending everything was okay. It was about choosing words that nurtured instead of punished. And over time, my inner world became a more compassionate place to live. Self-reflection deepened this shift. I made space every week to just check in. Not to fix, not to plan, just to listen. I'd ask myself questions like, what's been weighing on me? Where am I out of alignment? What am I afraid to feel right now? It was uncomfortable at first, but clarity always followed. And with clarity came choice. These practices, meditation, inner dialogue, reflection, they work together like threads in a tapestry. They reweave the fabric of how you relate to yourself. And once that changes, everything else does too. But maybe the most unexpected teacher on this path has been empathy. Not just toward others, but toward myself. I used to think empathy was this outward-facing trait, something you give to people in pain. But true empathy begins inward. It's looking at your own mess, your own contradictions, and saying, I see you. I get it. You're human. When you extend that kindness to yourself, it naturally spills over to others. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop trying to fix them or judge them. You just witness. And in that witnessing, something beautiful happens. Connection. You realize we're all carrying something. That behind every mask is a story. That everyone's fighting battles no one else can see. And suddenly, life feels less lonely. That's what these practices give you. Not perfection, not certainty, but presence, groundedness, a deeper relationship with yourself, and through that, with the world. I won't lie and say it's easy. It takes consistency, patience, gentleness, especially on the days when you want to give up, when the old voice returns and says, this isn't working. But those are the days that matter most. The days you show up anyway. The days you choose yourself again and again. And eventually, something shifts. You realize the prison door was never locked. You were just waiting for permission to walk through. So you give it to yourself. And that first step, shaky as it may be, leads to a life that doesn't just look different. It feels different. Because for the first time, it's being lived from the inside out. I used to think that authenticity meant being bold, loud, unapologetically yourself. But as I've walked this path a bit longer, I've realized that true authenticity isn't about being loud. It's about being honest. Deeply, sometimes uncomfortably honest. With others, sure, but mostly with yourself. And that's the hardest part. Because being honest with yourself means admitting that some of the choices you've made, some of the things you've clung to, the identities you've built, the relationships you've kept, weren't really yours. They were borrowed, inherited, performed, and that can be painful to see. I remember the first time I sat down and really asked myself, what parts of my life are rooted in fear instead of truth? That question cracked something open. It wasn't that everything in my life was wrong, but so much of it had been chosen by the version of me who was trying to prove something. To someone, maybe even to everyone. I had been chasing a life that made sense on paper, but not in my body, not in my heart. And that's the thing about living from ego. It's rarely sustainable. Eventually, it demands more than it gives. Eventually, you feel the dissonance, the subtle ache of misalignment, the sense that you're playing a role in someone else's script, even though it has your name on it. So I started making changes, small ones at first, letting myself rest without guilt, saying no to things I used to say yes to just to keep the peace, being quiet in conversations where I used to overperform. At first, it felt like I was doing something wrong, like I was disappointing some invisible audience I'd carried around in my head for years. But then something surprising happened. I started to feel lighter, not in a euphoric way, just in a steady, grounded kind of way, like I was finally walking in shoes that fit. There's a kind of peace that comes with not pretending anymore. But let me be clear, authenticity isn't easy. It often comes with loss. When you stop playing the part people expect of you, not everyone claps. Some people leave. Some people get uncomfortable. Some try to pull you back into the version of you they were more comfortable with. And it hurts. God, it hurts. But here's the truth no one tells you. Losing people who only love the mask is not the same as being unloved. It's just the cost of becoming real. And what you gain is immeasurable. You begin to attract people who love the you that doesn't need to perform. The you that breathes a little easier in your own skin. The you that can sit in silence and not panic. The you that no longer needs to prove anything to feel worthy. That's the shift. From impressing to expressing. From pretending to being. You start to say things like, I don't know, and mean it. You admit when you're scared. You cry without apologizing. You laugh too loud. You change your mind. You stop filtering yourself into something digestible. And instead, you just show up. Messy, honest, whole. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be what others want, you become someone worth truly knowing. Not because you're perfect, but because you're true. I used to think the point was to be liked. Now I know the point is to be known. To be seen for who you are, all of it. The light and the shadow. The flaws and the softness. The brilliance and the bruises. That's real connection. And it only becomes possible when you're brave enough to stop editing yourself for acceptance. I'm still learning this. Still catching the old habits when they creep in. The urge to shrink, to smooth the edges, to blend in. But now I notice. Now I pause. And more often than not, I choose truth over comfort. Because comfort is a short-term fix. But truth builds something that lasts. So if you're in that place where you're slowly peeling back the layers and starting to live from your center, I see you. I honor you. It's not an easy path, but it is a beautiful one. And every time you choose honesty over approval, you come home to yourself a little more. That's the real journey. Not becoming something new, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. There's a moment that comes, usually after the dust has settled. After the masks are laid down, the pattern's broken, the silence heard. When something inside you finally exhales. Not because everything is figured out, but because for the first time in a long time, you feel aligned. Not perfect, not finished, just real. That's the quiet miracle of awakening. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with clarity, a stillness that doesn't feel empty, but alive. And when it arrives, it brings the kind of peace you didn't know you were missing. For me, it showed up in the most ordinary moments, sipping tea in the morning without reaching for my phone, standing in front of the mirror without mentally picking myself apart, listening to someone, really listening without planning what to say next. It wasn't that life got easier. It was that I stopped making it harder by fighting reality. I began to understand that meaning isn't something we find. It's something we feel when we live close to our truth. When our inner and outer lives stop contradicting each other. When we stop abandoning ourselves in pursuit of validation that never really lands. And with that understanding came a new kind of responsibility. Not the heavy, burden kind, but a sacred one. A responsibility to keep choosing what's real. To keep softening when it's easier to shut down. To keep listening to the quiet voice inside. Even when it whispers things the world doesn't want to hear. That voice is your compass. It doesn't shout. It nudges. It's the part of you that says, slow down, when everyone else is speeding up. that says, speak up, even when your voice shakes, that says, rest when you've convinced yourself you need to do more. And the more I listened, the more connected I felt, not just to myself, but to everything around me. I began to see others differently too, less as obstacles or mirrors of comparison, and more as fellow travelers, each carrying their own wounds, their own hopes, their own longing to be free. That's when empathy deepens, when you realize we're all in this strange, beautiful mess together, and that maybe, just maybe, the greatest gift we can give one another is presence. Not advice, not solutions, just the honest, loving presence of someone who's willing to witness you as you are. I think that's what healing really is. It's not about never hurting again. It's about hurting consciously, about knowing where the wound is and choosing not to scratch it open every time it stings. It's about growing soft where you used to harden and choosing to open again and again, even when life gives you every reason not to. It's also about recognizing that the ego never fully disappears. It still whispers. It still wants to protect, to compare, to control. But now you see it for what it is, a scared part of you trying to keep you safe. You don't hate it. You just don't let it drive the car anymore. You hold it gently. You thank it. And then you turn back to the path that feels like home. And home isn't a destination. It's a way of being. It's when you speak from your truth, even if it trembles. When you choose integrity over image. When you treat yourself with the kind of love you once thought you had earned. It's when you let yourself be ordinary, and in doing so, discover how extraordinary that actually feels. So if you're here, at the end of this reflection, or maybe at the beginning of your own, I want you to know this. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not too late. You're unfolding. And every breath you take in alignment with your truth is a step toward the life that's been waiting for you all along. This world doesn't need a perfect version of you. It needs the real one. The messy, beautiful, courageous soul who's willing to be seen. Not for who they're trying to be, but for who they already are. And if you've read this far, if any part of this spoke to something deep inside you, then maybe you're already on your way. Welcome home. If this felt meaningful to you, it might mean something to someone else too. So hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. That's how YouTube knows to share it with others. Maybe together, we can help someone see things a little differently.